other participants who are not able to make it to be able to access the recordings over the coming days and weeks to get the information from this session. Just like to start by an acknowledgement of country, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'm speaking to you today from Wathaurong lands. Might just turn to a little bit of introductory context. We can just go on, Leonard. This is the second of 2 sessions. We've just completed the first session, which was a general stakeholder briefing, which focused on the overall NEM reform implementation program and paid particular attention to what's happening now and what's committed for next year. This session now is a broader overview. It's intended to provide you a more holistic view of the NEM reform program and our best understanding of what the implementation plan would look like for the various reforms over the coming several years, rather than looking at the committed items specifically. We do have a fair number of people on the call. I think the best way to take questions, and we do like to take questions, I do like to take questions as we go and deal with them as we go. I find that works well, depending on the number of questions though. The best way to manage it with a large group is probably for you to pop your question in the chat, and we'll aim to answer each of those questions at the relevant point, which is typically at the end of each slide. We do have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A, so anything we can't get to, we'll hopefully be able to capture in the Q&A session. Turning to the agenda, I'll just make some contextual remarks, and then I'll hand over to Lance Brooks from our Reform Insights team, who will talk about the roadmap and the specifics of the roadmap, and in particular the initiatives and where they're up to. Then we'll run a Q&A, and by then I think we should be pretty much done. All right, let's turn to the background and the context and just some introductory remarks on the roadmap. We released our first version of the roadmap in early 2020, which, as you'd appreciate, was just at the onset of the pandemic. There was quite a lot of attention at that point in time about, well, there's a lot of reforms on, but there's also a lot of other things to deal with arising from the early stages of the pandemic. And there was a really clear appetite to understand the holistic picture and to have discussions about, well, where do the priorities lie? We have built on the roadmap since then, that holistic view of the reform implementation program. I think there's a high degree of appetite from many participants and market bodies as well to understand what that reform program looks like. The reform program has been quite very active and intense over the past few years, and indeed with the ESB's post-2025 reform program being published over the past couple of years, we can see that will take quite a lot of implementation effort, and very important to understand what the implementation program looks like. So the roadmap, we've maintained the roadmap since that first release in 2020. It's evolved a good bit since the 2020 release. I think this is probably the 7th release now, and presumably around about the same number of roadmap sessions that we've run. We've typically run 2 or 3 per year. The idea of the roadmap, I mean, firstly, it's to provide transparency and the best understanding for all of us about what the holistic implementation program looks like. It does, and when we say implementation, we are focused particularly on significant industry implementation across IT and processes, but there are some non-IT implementation programs as well, and they are recognised in the program. We typically don't, and can everyone just check they're on mute, please? We typically focus on, as I say, the regulatory and IT change. The idea there, not only transparency, but also to look at ways to coordinate the change, to find opportunities to make the change more efficient, to remove costs wherever that can be done. Helps us all with planning, and it also helps inform the market bodies and particularly rule makers around the topic of implementation programs and how things fit from an implementation perspective. We originally started with just a focus on the national electricity market. We have expanded that to include gas reform initiatives as they apply to the East Coast jurisdictions. And hopefully, therefore, that's helpful to those of you who participate in both gas and electricity markets. Right, so that's a little bit of background of the roadmap. We actually published the most recent version of the roadmap, which is version 3 of the new integrated roadmap. That was published with the supporting artifacts a couple of weeks ago. So we are essentially now providing a briefing for you on it, and that's available on the website. Let's just turn to the next slide. One of the things we're trying to do with the NEM reform program, because it's a really significant implementation program, is that I guess in terms of reform implementation, these are reforms to facilitate the energy transition. All of us are involved in the energy transition in one way, shape or form. These reforms are seeking to facilitate it, and we're all in this together. We need the reforms. Once the decision has been made about the reforms to implement them, we need the reforms to work, to be successful. We need it to happen in the most efficient and effective way that we possibly can. What we're saying on this slide is that this is about more than just having the conversations and having the engagement and having the working group structures. We need a greater level of planning, and as you can see, part of that planning is the roadmap. We have some other structures there in terms of engagement and making deliberations on investment decisions and providing advice on go live dates. But then once we're in execution, there are a number of items that can help participants with the execution of their own programs. And there are also a number of artifacts that we prepare that help ensure overall industry readiness. The idea being that the AEMO program can do a number of things that helps facilitate readiness across the industry and for participants that can improve the success of the reforms. Turning to the next slide, and look, I won't dwell on this next slide. Those of you who were in the previous session will have seen this slide. Therefore, it's probably best that I don't dwell on it. But those of you who weren't, just briefly, around the bottom of the slide, you can see we've set out the ESB post-2025 reform work streams, resource adequacy mechanisms, essential system services, integration of CER and flexible demand, transmission and access, and data strategy. We have further integrated things like the retail market improvements initiatives, which is typically ongoing business as usual type improvements to help improve efficiency throughout the industry. And we've also got some AEMO foundational and strategic initiatives that are either foundational to facilitating the reforms or are strategic in the sense that they provide an opportunity to more efficiently deliver initiatives across the industry. I think the big takeaway from this slide, though, is there's a lot of stuff on this. There's a lot of some initiatives have been delivered, some are in flight, but there's quite a lot of other initiatives that are still in the policy and rules development phase. And the roadmap does its best based on current information to set out where we would expect those initiatives to be implemented. So I don't really want to go through it in any more detail than that, because it's kind of what the purpose of the roadmap is, to help you make sense of that from an implementation point of view and also from a certainty point of view, which is equally important. So that's what I wanted to say by way of introduction, and I'll just turn to questions. And I do see a question in the chat, so I will take that one. On the program overview slide, are the teams working on each team soloed from each other, or do they work together to ensure any issues from one work stream that may impact another are addressed? Yeah, good question. And this goes to program structure. And we might just go back to the fan diagram, Leonard, please. AEMO has structured this as a single integrated program for that very reason, to minimise the risk of siloing. And we're actually presenting the NEM reform program to industry as a single integrated program, so that we can get the coordination across the initiatives to deal with exactly those questions that you're referring to. And for example, that's why you see the retail market improvements work stream there, even though that's not part of the ESB's post-2025 reform program. There are reforms coming through that impact participants and impact AEMO, and it's just important that we have a really coordinated approach on all of those things. So we coordinate whether it's upfront in procedures development, upfront in implementation planning, or down at the pointy end when we're getting to release management and go lives. It's important that that's coordinated through a single program. So that is what we have done. Thank you for the question. That is an important question. All right, I'm just pausing to see if there's any other questions. I don't think there are any. So what we might do is get into the, we've got a hand up. Is that Soham?
Hi, this is Soham from Alinta. I have a question in this slide itself, in this program overview. These small projects under all the different chunks of projects, are they in sequence, and that goes to the NEM reform ambition? If I take the example of integration of CER, is that integrating energy storage is the first one that you are going to implement, and then you are going to unlocking CER benefits in this order?
Yeah. Let's take that question as part of the roadmap. The roadmap will set out the chronology better. You shouldn't read chronology into this slide, Soham, to be honest. Best to do that through the roadmap.
Sure, thanks.
All right, I'll hand over now to Lance Brooks, and Lance will take us through the roadmap and what's happened since the last roadmap.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. So before I just jump in, Soham, just on your question there, totally agree with Peter. What we are seeing within the roadmap and what will become clear over the course of the next 35 minutes or so is that there's a lot of change and things are moving at any one point in time. So yeah, chronologically, the roadmap is your best guess at this point in time based on what we know. So I thought we'd just kick off. Firstly, my name's Lance. Obviously, I'm part of the Reform Development Insights Group at AEMO. I thought we'd just kick off this section with a little bit of background on the process that we've taken with updating the roadmap, as well as highlighting some of the changes that we captured throughout that process. So firstly, as Peter mentioned, we did publish the roadmap on the 5th of October, and this actually followed a process that started back in August with a group called the Reform Delivery Committee, or the RDC. So what you see on the slide here is a timeline and the steps that were taken over that period. And as you can see, there was various things that happened. So there was workshops, there was various meetings, there was sharing of draft materials for their consideration. And all of this was quite important for a number of reasons. Well, not only to identify the change, but more importantly, to discuss their potential impacts from an implementation standpoint across the program as a whole. For those that aren't familiar, this work is actually done in accordance with our governance arrangements. So there's a change management process that we've set out for the NEM reform program. When the slides do get published, you can find that in Appendix C of this pack. So do go take a look. Now, when I think about change, when it comes to the roadmap, we typically think about it in one of three buckets. So no change being no updates or amendments required to the assumptions that we've made within the roadmap itself, either to an initiative or to the program as a whole. The second one being incremental change. So these we think about of them as minor updates that don't really impact the overall delivery of an initiative or the program. So this could be something as simple as a name change, and we've certainly seen that over time. Where we like to spend most of our time, however, is on what we call more material changes. And here we're talking about, say, changes in scope of the initiative as it's progressed through, say, a rules consultation process, or changes in timeline, particularly for those that are greater than 2 months. And that could be, say, delays in policy decisions at a government level, for example. And we've definitely seen quite a bit of that, and I'll talk to that in a second. The other thing I just want to call out, so we obviously did this work in collaboration with the Reform Delivery Committee. We also keep the Program Consultative Forum, so anyone who's part of that forum is also updated on the progress and the findings of the assessment as we do go along. I should note that all of that work that's done over that August to October time period is available on our website as well, so you can go out and have a look at the workshop and meeting materials. We do publish everything for that stuff. If we can jump into the next page, please. So I guess, as I mentioned before, we do focus on the more material changes when it comes to discussing particularly their impacts across the program. What's certainly becoming quite apparent each time we do this exercise is just the sheer volume of change that's occurred over what is a relatively short period of time. So people on the call may remember version 2 of the roadmap was actually only published in April of this year. And so this slide does a pretty good job of highlighting some of the material changes identified since that April time period. From memory, I think the count is the 20 of the 29 or 30 initiatives that fall under that post-2025 program banner were deemed to actually have material changes this time around. So there's a lot to capture within the roadmap. I will cover off on a few of the initiatives individually over the coming slides, but I just wanted to kind of touch on some of the key themes as to what's driven some of the change that we've identified. So the first one being the ESB coming to an end. I'm sure everyone on the call is familiar with that. In doing so, this resulted in the ESB releasing a number of publications. And so these publications either fell into a few different buckets. Final recommendations to ministers, such as, for example, the Data Services Amendment Bill, or a handover of the policy consultation process to either the AMC or AER, respectively. And then we saw this with regards to bill transparency and network visibility in particular. We also saw some recommendations and next steps that were promoted by the ESB. So an example of that being the EV Charging Standing Data Register initiative. It was recommended that AEMO develop a rule change request in consultation with industry for including this data into the existing DER register. So we've taken on that recommendation, and we're developing a rule change request at this point in time. Similarly, another one that falls into that bucket is the Enhanced Information Initiative. It was recommended that AEMO publish an enhanced locational information report annually, and as well as establish a stakeholder advisory group around that. So we've actually picked that up as part of our BAU activities, and we'll be looking to publish that in Q1 2024, I believe. The second thing that in one of the critical things that we've identified in terms of change is just the various updates that we've heard from the AMC in relation to the rules consultation process itself. So we've seen multiple directions papers since over that period of time, two of which had a significant change in scope for a couple of the initiatives, and I'll speak to those in a couple of slides' time. We also saw the publication of consultation papers kicking off the rule change process for some of the initiatives as well. So, I'll call those out in a slide or two. Within all of these documents, as I'm sure everyone on the call is familiar, there's obviously updates to the AMC's consultation timing. So we do look to capture that within the roadmap. Since then, we've actually had some further updates, so I'll call those out when we get to them as well. Finally, the third thing that I always think about is just anything new. And so that can come in the form of a new rule change request, for example. And so we definitely identified a few of those and captured those on the slide as well. Next slide, please, Linda. So there's a lot of words on the slide, so I certainly don't want to cover off everything, but I just thought I'd touch on a couple of the initiatives that saw quite major changes in terms of their direction. So the Enhancing Reserve Information Initiative, this was formerly known as Operating Reserve Market. On the 3rd of August, the AMC published a directions paper on this rule change that indicated it would not be recommending an operating reserve market moving forward. The AMC had a bunch of reasons for that, and you can certainly pick that up in that notification. What they have proposed, however, is a new direction for the rule change, and that focusing on what we consider incremental improvements. So an example of this being development and publication of more information to the market on storage and state of charge for batteries as one example. They're also canvassing the idea of procurement of FCAS at a regional level, or alternatively limiting the amount of FCAS procured from a single region to increase the amount procured from others. So this is a live rule change that remains ongoing at this point in time. So we've updated the roadmap for a couple of things. One, to recognize the change in timeline associated with the rule change. Since that directions paper, the AMC have come out and announced the draft determination is now anticipated in December of this year. Previously, that was captured as October. The other thing that we've changed is just we had an assumption around what the implementation requirements for an operating reserve market might be. So we had captured that within the roadmap. What we've done now is just put a placeholder for now to reflect what the implementation requirements might be moving forward, just because we don't know. And so we definitely need a little bit more information on where that initiative is going, and that will come obviously through the draft determination. The other one that I wanted to call out is the improving security frameworks for the energy transition. So for those that are familiar, this was formerly known as the Operational Security Mechanism. In May, we heard from the AMC that a shift in the approach for this as well, to, again, identify more, I guess, immediate solutions, to use the AMC's language on this, which look to streamline or simplify the existing security services frameworks. So there's a range of things that they are considering within that bucket. Including aligning the existing inertia and system strength frameworks. So things like introducing NEM-wide inertia floor, aligning procurement timeframes for system strength framework, removing restrictions on the procurement of synthetic inertia, for example. They're also looking at removing the exclusion to procuring inertia network services and system strengths in the NSCAS framework, and creating a new transitional non-market ancillary service framework for AEMO to procure security services necessary for the energy transition. So that's just a few of the bullet points that they are considering within that. They published a directions paper in August of this year, and we are anticipating a final determination in December at this time. Obviously, that's all subject to change. So like the other initiative before, we've obviously updated the timeline to reflect those changes in the rules consultation process, but we've also updated the assumptions around the implementation timeline as well, just to reflect that change in scope. And so until we get a little bit more certainty on what that scope is likely to be, we will then update the roadmap to reflect that, to provide a more indicative timeline for implementation. So that was just a couple on those that had both changes in scope and timing. We can just jump to the next slide, please, Leonard. On the screen, examples of where we've just seen changes, material changes in timing only. So for the initiative formerly known as Flexible Trading Arrangements, now known as Unlocking CR Benefits Through Flexible Trading, we saw the AMC publish a directions paper in August as part of the next phase of its consultation process. Since this time, we've actually seen further updates on the proposed timeline for the rules consultation. So previously, we were anticipating a draft determination in December. That's now being pushed out to February of next year. A similar thing has happened with regards to the initiative formerly known as Scheduled Light. Someone might not be on mute there, so if you can just turn yourself on mute if that's okay. Yeah, so a similar thing we've seen with the initiative formerly known as Schedule 8, now known as Integrating Price Responsive Resources into the NEM. So we saw the AMC actually kick off the consultation for this in August with the publishing of their consultation paper. Like FTA, we've actually seen updates to the timeline for this rules consultation as well. So we were anticipating a draft determination in December. That's now also being pushed out to February to align with that FTA moving forward. So we've updated the roadmap for both of those initiatives. The other one that I wanted to call out in terms of some of the material changes around initiatives was the various DR initiatives that are captured within the roadmap. So many of these, or at least aspects of these, remain at a policy development design stage and really subject to either ongoing rules or industry trials, for example. Given this, we have updated the roadmap to reflect a continuation of that policy work in this space. Now, one of the things that we are aware of is that the ESB has completed an end of program report on its CER or DR initiatives for energy ministers' consideration. And that report outlines various recommendations moving forward. What we've agreed to with the Reform Delivery Committee is to do a more holistic review of all of the DR initiatives as they are captured on the roadmap following publication of this report. So what I'm trying to say here is we've updated the roadmap to reflect that there is ongoing policy work in this initiative. We do anticipate larger revisions to this section of the roadmap as part of the next update, really to reflect any outcomes from the upcoming Energy Ministers meeting on that report moving forward. I might just jump into the next slide. I can't see questions, so Peter, do interrupt me if there's any questions.
Press on, okay. Lance. There are no questions at the moment.
Perfect. Thanks, Peter. So I do apologize, and I apologize every time I present the slide. It's really difficult to read, so my apologies for that. What this slide does provide is a snapshot of the roadmap for those wondering what it does look like, and if you haven't seen it before, as well as the summary of the changes that have been made. So obviously we've captured all of those material changes, as well as some of the incremental changes that we've identified through the process. In addition to that, we've also included updated implementation assumptions on or timelines for those AEMO foundational and strategic initiatives. Specifically here, I'm talking about identity and access management, industry data exchange, and portal consolidation. I'll touch on those timelines in a few slides' time. However, Ulrika did cover these in the briefing earlier today, so please do refer to that briefing if you are looking for more information, or to the roadmap itself and some of the supporting artifacts. Typically, whenever we go through an update, we also do a general restructure of the initiatives as well, just to be consistent with those that have committed go-live dates or estimated go-live dates. And we typically remove those initiatives that aren't implemented. Oh, sorry, that have been implemented, not aren't implemented. Next slide, please. So in addition to the roadmap and the various updates that we've captured within there, I'm hoping everyone's familiar with the supporting artifacts that are published in conjunction with the roadmap. So this includes initiative briefs, a program scope, and governance documents for the NEM reform program as a whole. For those that aren't familiar, these provide stakeholders with an overview not only of the program scope itself, but the governance arrangements that support it. And then for each of the initiatives, particularly those post-2025 initiatives, we've provided 3 to 4 page summaries on each of them. And here we capture things such as the objective of the initiative, what's the scope where it is known, excuse me, what are some of the relationships and dependencies, and and we also provide links to various publications or consultations in relation to each initiative. So very much try and have it as a bit of a reference document for those coming into the program to get up to speed quite quickly on some of the initiatives, and then obviously providing links to further information for those that want to go through. I might just stop there. Are there any questions on kind of the process that we've taken at all?
Lance, we have a question in the chat from Mark Riley. Is the update brief clearly linked to the roadmap version? So I think Mark is asking, are the initiative briefs updated to be consistent with the version of the roadmap?
Yeah, the answer to that is absolutely. So we do in this case, it was a pretty heavy editing exercise, getting everything up to date, given some of the changes that have occurred over this time period. So it's part of the exercise of updating it.
Thanks, Lance. Look, just as I know it sounds quite minor, but as with these things, keeping track of which document you're looking at all the time can be a complex piece of work. It might be good if the documents are versioned. If they're versioned to align, so the brief should be version 3 to go with roadmap version 3. That just helps us all make sure that we're looking at all the right things at the same time, or make it easy for people to look at the things at the right time. Thanks.
Yeah, great suggestion, Mark. We'll definitely pick that up. I like that moving forward. Great. Okay, if there's no other questions, we might just jump into the next section if that's okay.
No other questions, Lance. Press on.
Perfect. So we've obviously covered off on the process and some of the changes that we've identified. We'll take a quick walk through the roadmap. So it's always quite hard to present the roadmap. It is in Excel format. There are quite a number of rows to kind of walk through. But what I wanted to do is just take you through, obviously, the next couple of years in particular, where we've got a little bit more certainty on what's happening. So just starting with 2023, it's fair to say it's been a pretty busy year with a full program of committed releases for all of us. What this slide shows is actually an amalgamation of version 2 and version 3 of the roadmap. And I've been a little bit cheeky there. And what I wanted to really highlight is just the initiatives that have been delivered or have been worked upon over the past 12 months. So as people are likely familiar, we've obviously had the successful implementation of fast frequency response and increased empty passer initiatives just this month. And as the team in the previous briefing spoke through, there's also been ongoing incremental implementation of some other initiatives, particularly integrating energy storage systems and consumer data rights as two key call-outs there. One thing that I don't think we've touched on, or Peter may have touched on it earlier, is the roadmap does capture what's happening on the East Coast gas front as well, in terms of the number of reforms there. And there's quite a big stage 1 reform activity, stage 1 activity, there's quite a lot of reform on the East Coast in terms of stage 1 of the gas supply adequacy and reliability initiatives that needed to be implemented ahead of winter as well. So a big push from AEMO and stakeholders to actually work through all of that in a very compressed timeline. So really grateful to all parties involved in that. What this slide doesn't show, and we should show if we had more space, all of the initiatives in which policy or rules consultations are actually being worked on as well. So these are obviously happening in the background or in the foreground, depending on which team you sit in, but there's a number of things that are progressing, and I've touched on some of these already. So the enhancing reserve information rule change, which is live, the improving security frameworks rule change, which is also live. So work will continue on these reform initiatives moving forward in the coming weeks and months towards the end of this year. And this will actually be a foundational key piece for a lot of the policy reform work over the coming years. Next slide, please.
Lance, I'm just going to chip in here. We've just got a further comment from Mark, which probably best to deal with it now. With the briefs, it would also help if we could identify the briefs, this is the initiative briefs, which have changed, rather than having to check them all against an earlier version. Mark, understand your request. We are happy to help out with a version of the initiative briefs that are change marked. And if anyone else on the call wants a version of the initiative briefs that are change marked, please just shoot us a note to nemreform@aemo.com.au and we'll just ask Leonard to pop that in the chat. Shoot us a note and we're happy to send you out a version. Lance, was there anything you wanted to add on that?
No, well, yes, one thing, in the roadmap itself, you can also, it's currently hidden in terms of the columns, but if you open up some of the columns, you'll also identify, we do call out which initiatives have changed, so you can reference back to the initiative brief document just to identify those. But yeah, certainly we've also got the marked up versions that we can share with individuals. Great. So 2024, it'd be nice to say that we're slowing down. I fear that's not really the case. I think it's going to be another quite busy year for us all. There's a number of committed or proposed go live dates that fall into that 2024 bucket. And we heard some of that at the last briefing. So just to kind of cover them off really quickly again, I've mentioned already the enhanced information and that locational information report that we are picking up as part of our BAU activities moving forward. So that will come out next year. There's tranche 4 for the consumer data rights as well to go live in March. There's obviously a couple of the bigger ones in terms of integrating energy storage systems in June of next year, and then that non-operational or frequency performance payments starting off in December of next year as well. So a lot of things with go live dates across the year. As I mentioned earlier, for 2023, there's obviously a whole bunch of other reforms that we are working on. One of them to call out is the enhanced reserve information and just where that lands over the year as well. So obviously we need to better understand the scope for implementation, but depending on when that is finalized, then we may be required to start on that. We may not complete it within the calendar year, but certainly we may need to at least kick off work in that space. So that's just one example of a couple of the rule changes that are afoot at this point in time. In a similar manner, and Ulrika spoke to the foundational strategic initiatives, we called out that we're looking to have a business case hopefully done early next year for consideration. If that gets approved and that gets up, then there's potential that work on those initiatives might also commence throughout the year. So a bit of a planning exercise needs to occur. And I've actually got a slide that shows some of the early thinking on what that implementation might look like moving forward. And then there's just other things that are happening in the space. So some of the DR initiatives, which aren't actually shown on this screen, obviously they're still working through various policy aspects, as well as the congestion relief market and priority access initiative as well, which if it does get up would be quite a large and complex initiative. So there's still a bit to work through that from a policy perspective at this point in time. Next slide, please. Finally, I just want I won't go further than 2025. I think 2025 presents as a kind of a bit of a mixed bag at the moment, with a couple of committed go live dates for frequency performance payments, as well as the ST parcel replacement project. So both of these are starting in the middle of the year. But in addition to those, there's obviously multiple reforms that are subject to that rules consultation or policy development, which could see final decisions made and which could see firmed committed go live dates impacting moving forward. So a couple of them have again been spoken about in the last briefing. The metering service review, we heard from Megan on that. Improving security frameworks is another one that could come up throughout this year, as well as the flexible trading and the scheduled light, or unlocking CR benefits through flexible trading and integrating price responsive resources into the NEM as well. So they're all kind of earmarked for this kind of time period at this point in time. The last two, the flexible trading and scheduled light initiatives, given some of the delays that we have heard in terms of when draft determinations are out, could be actually pushed into the 2026 time period. So it's a bit of a watch this space at this point in time, and that assumption around the 2026 time period is very much on no changes to the actual scope of those initiatives. So very much basing it on our current assumptions. The other one, and I've touched on this before as well, is congestion relief and priority access work. Depending on where this initiative actually goes, it's obviously potentially significant and complex in its own right. If we are required to implement or start implementation of this work, we'd need to factor that in, and that would need to be accounted for moving forward. For that one in particular, we've only just left it as a placeholder, where obviously it's a bit of a wait and see for how the policy process works through at this point in time. And then, like I mentioned, similar to 2024, if the business case for foundational and strategic initiatives gets up, we may progress with these, and that might actually just take us to the next slide, which we show in a little bit more detail. So I wanted to show this slide as this is some of the work that is happening through the consultation process on those foundational and strategic initiatives. So the team internally working on this have identified and worked with stakeholders around what they're calling a consolidated strawman roadmap. None of this is firm and committed to at this point in time. Obviously, it's subject to the business case in the first place, but they're also working through what are the planning activities for what implementation of this might look like. Now, obviously, these foundational and strategic initiatives are quite important, as they do have ties or relationships to how we think about implementation of some of the reform initiatives. And so at the bottom of the slide there, you can see some of the linkages to the reform initiatives that are being considered through that process as well. So won't spend a huge amount of time explaining all of this slide, other than to say that this is some of the detail that we are going into, and this detail is then reflected in the NEM reform implementation roadmap. We will look to update this as and when things change through that consultation and business case development process. Next slide, please. So I guess, what does all this mean? Well, we've known that there's challenges and risks around the program. One of the key ones is obviously managing certainty is a really key challenge for us. We do anticipate improvements in terms of the level of certainty across the program over the coming, say, 3 to 6 months, with key decisions being made either at a rules consultation level or at a policy level. And I've obviously spoken through those as over the course of the last 30 minutes. The other one that we always think about, particularly internally, and I know stakeholders have this issue as well, just about deliverability and how we go about resourcing. So this continues to be, I guess, a watch item for all of us, and how things are playing out through that rules and policy development phase. The roadmap does provide a basis for analysing the implementation impacts of various initiatives to participants and AEMO. And for us, it really helps facilitate some of the conversations that we do have with stakeholders, either through the various forums that we do run, to understand that integrated approach to implementing everything that's on the go at the moment. I did just want to finish off with an update on what's next in terms of future roadmap timing. So given some of the announcements that we've seen since publication of the roadmap, so we've seen 3 rule changes announced, delays or variations in terms of the timing for draft determinations, for example. And we've also had a request from one participant to include an additional line item around some of the MSATs and B2B changes within the roadmap. We are exploring the prospect of publishing what we're calling a version 3.1. And if we do so, that would be published in December, and that would look to capture some of those changes that have occurred in the last couple of weeks. We will take that to the Reform Delivery Committee at our next meeting, which is actually scheduled in November moving forward. And then leading on to that, we'll do a full update of the roadmap, which is scheduled for early next year, ahead of publication, likely in April at this point in time. Within that, we would hopefully capture some of that DER and holistic review that I've spoken about previously, and capture that any outcomes from that Energy Ministers meeting on those initiatives moving forward. So that's kind of all I wanted to capture. Are there any questions, Peter, or any questions from the group that I can answer?
No questions in the chat at the present, Lance. So what we might do is just turn to the final section, and indeed, if you've got overall questions, folks, now is a very good time to pop them into the chat, and we'll be able to get to them as we give a brief update on the questions we received beforehand. Back to you, Lance.
Yeah, perfect. We can jump into the next slide. So we did receive a few questions from stakeholders before today's session. So maybe we'll just, in the interest of time, while to give people the opportunity to type any questions. One was like people were wanting to understand kind of what's happening in terms of the roadmap, what's coming out. So hopefully I've been able to provide a bit of an overview of that through the session, and obviously in conjunction with the briefing session beforehand. If not, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk through it. There are obviously a range of materials that are available on our website as well. The other one, we had a question about CER, and does more need to happen in terms of its current operation within the NEM, and do we need a radical reimagination of that? What I would say in relation to this is what's captured in the NEM reform program is really guided by what the ESB's post-2025 market design process had identified. And there are some key initiatives that are focusing on the DR aspect in terms of its operation within the NEM. So obviously integrating price responsive resources into the NEM, unlocking CR benefits through flexible trading are both under consideration by the AMC and examples of that. Moving forward, as I've mentioned earlier, there is that holistic review that we are looking to undertake with regards to the initiatives that are captured in the roadmap. So we'll likely see more to come in that space moving forward. The other question that we did receive is just around the data services initiative. So I wasn't quite sure whether this question was about the specific initiative around data services itself, or whether this is about the broader data strategy work that's happening there. So I've got a little bit of both in terms of my response there. In terms of the data services initiative, if I just take that on at face value, it basically looks to establish a data services unit within AEMO. Now, we're in the throes of planning through what that might actually look like. And if we think about it, there's kind of different ways that we can respond to that initiative. There's kind of the open inbox, if you like, or front door method, as we call it internally, where we simply respond to initiatives, or we can go down a bit more of a more fulsome path where we're uplifting and we have a digital front door and things of that nature. So, you know, a little bit more sophistication in terms of how we're going about it. Those decisions haven't been made, as far as I'm aware, at this point in time. So still working through what that might look like. The idea behind that is better access to some of the data that we have, but only better access to some of the data that we have for trusted policymakers, planners, researchers. So in the amendment bill, I think they're referred to as Class A and Class B type participants. And the idea behind that is a few different things. Reduce data and analytics delivery friction between the market bodies and ourselves and researchers, for example, but also better data-driven decision-making from a policy standpoint, for example, as well. In addition to the data services initiative, obviously there's a few different things that are covered within the data strategy pathway itself, and these are all subject to ongoing consultations or rule changes that are in development at this point in time.
Lance, thanks for the run through of those questions. There's been no further questions pop up into the chat. A couple of comments. Thank you, Ranjan and Chiro, for your comments, supportive comments. Any final calls for questions? Question from Sean. Can I ask if when exec forum meeting invites will go out? Sean, in relation to that, the exec forum is scheduled for the 6th of December, and that did go out in the last PCF minutes. I think it was earlier this week or late last week. Invitation or an email has gone out to exec forum members, so those who attended the last exec forum or who've been nominated by their organisations to attend. I think the invites, Leonard, when do the actual meeting invites go out, or have they gone?
So the 6th of December, the invite gone to.
I can't hear you, Leonard. Can you try again?
sorry. The invites have been issued for the 6th of December to participants.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank
in
you.
2024, we are just in the process of just working out that plan for next year as well in terms of when they occur.
Thank you. All right. Yes, and Rob received his meeting invite yesterday, so thanks, Rob, for that info. All right. Thank you, Sean. Any final questions? Lance, I might just hand over to Dave Reynolds because I think Dave's got a request for some feedback from attendees.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I guess it's just a quick request for anyone who has a minute to jump into, or even less than a minute to jump into the link in the chat and just provide any feedback on this session, and you can submit questions through that portal as well. And certainly feel free to keep in touch on the NEM reform at amo.com.au email as well for any questions going forward about forums or material. That's it from me, Peter. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, look, we do our best to anticipate the information that you need. If we haven't quite got that right, or if there's something extra that would be helpful to you, then please let us know and we can take account of it. All right, we are going to close the session there. Thanks very much for your attendance, everyone. Thanks for your efforts, AEMO team, in putting the materials together and presenting them. We'll close now, and thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks all.
Thanks very much.